another edition of the Great Lakes Divide podcast with Tom Crawford, Bluebilly Tom. I'm Ryan Schuling. Our thanks to Heather Frare and the Record Lounge for providing us with the music for tonight's podcast going in and coming out as well. Starting with Tears in Heaven by Eric Clapton. This song from about 25 or 26 years ago, as I recall, and very apropos for the somber note that we start today's podcast with, and that's because the loss of Cassius Winston's brother casting a pall over really all of the state of Michigan. He attended Albion College, did Zach Winston, the youngest brother of Cassius Winston, passing away, and the details of that becoming known and public over the last 24 hours. I woke up this morning to the news and figured that Cassius Winston would not play in tonight's game at Breslin against Binghamton, but he did. He pulled himself together. His father, his other brother Kai, who played in that game for Albion against Michigan State just last week, and they were together on the court before the game, hours before the game, in an empty gym, the three of them, father, the two sons, mourning the loss of their son and brother, shooting baskets together. It was at that time that Cassius had a conversation with head coach Tom Izzo, and of course, Coach Izzo told him, look, whatever you decide, whatever you feel comfortable doing or not doing, we're going to support you 100% and back your decision, whether that's to play in this game, to play and then decide you don't want to play in this game, or decide that you don't want to play at all. Those were the options on the table for Cassius Winston. Not only did he play, but it was stellar. The performance that he turned in tonight under the most difficult of circumstances that a young man at his age could ever face, and that's the loss of a loved one so close as a sibling. There was an Instagram post. There was also, I'm told, a Snapchat post which forecasted the ominous future immediately thereof of Zach Winston. And the conductor of the train, an Amtrak going from Detroit to Chicago, which goes right along the I-94 corridor there, and of course passes by and through Albion, noted that Zach put himself in front of the train, no notice for the train to react or do anything. This unfortunately is common for those who are committing suicide. He apparently had some emotional problems, mental illness, and these are things that often are silent demons that the outside world doesn't see, that people even closest to the individual either can't see or even if they do. And I believe that Cassius Winston did. If you look at his comment on the Instagram post, there's only so much that can be done from without when somebody is struggling and agonizing that much from within. And our thoughts, our prayers, our feelings, our hopes, and everything, condolences go out to the Winston family as they cope with this much, much too soon, just at the age of 19, Zach Winston. Basketball, far less important. The rivalry Michigan State, upon which this podcast is founded, far less important. But the game, I think, had a healing effect on Cassius Winston.
Coach, you had a really good response to the Kentucky game. What was your message to your team in the locker room?
Well, as you can imagine, there's a million emotions going on right now with everybody. I just said, we're going to play with a broken heart, but we're going to play. And that's kind of what we did. And believe it or not, of all the stats, the most impressive one for a coach, 4 turnovers. That's a miracle for us.
No, you guys played fast. Tempo took care of the basketball, really shared the rock well. I know you got emotional about your guy, because I know you love him. What was your message to Cassius and him coming out tonight?
Well, I told him the second half, we got to get you some shots. He was so unselfish the first half, and I just wanted him to feel good. I wanted him to remember that, he's given up a lot to come out and play tonight. So we just told him, but he's so unselfish. He had so many great assists. I do love the kid, and I appreciate the way our fans welcomed him.
You always talk about how fragile life is. And, I've been told for 60 years that every day you wake up, you're blessed, you're lucky. The only one that says it on a daily basis for me is Tum Tum. But it is fragile, and it kind of makes you reassess and think how much you should appreciate the opportunities you have, because none of us do. None of us complain about our jobs. I get to be at a place and watch a kid go through this and think that I have a chance to help him. It's incredible. But when you leave here tonight, whoever it is, son, daughter, older mother, father, wife or husband, It'd do you good to tell them you love them and you appreciate them. And it would do you a lot of good that any people closest to you that you say that. You say it, and you say it, and you say it. Because one morning you wake up and everything's one way. And by 9 o'clock that night, everything's another way. And then you don't get a chance to say it. So I told my team after, I loved every one of them.
Yeah, the key word today throughout, mid-Michigan, the state of Michigan, and all the college basketball world for that matter. I mean, Tom Izzo got like 50 texts from coaches and his coaches, fraternity head coaches, all throughout today. Is the fact that it just gives you a perspective on what's important in life. And I was amazed at Cassius Winston. I've always been amazed by that young man. I've talked to him a few times over the last few years, and he's just seems almost too good to be true. But how he handled that tonight, took that game over, and Tom Izzo in his post-game comments about how unified that team was, he is a special young man. And in this situation at Albion College, I know President Ditzler made a comment about how bad that school feels, and they feel horrible. I mean, Albion College has roughly 1,600 students, a very unified school. My son attended there, and they're hurting as bad. I mean, lost in this is Albion College and the Albion College basketball team and those teammates, let alone obviously the extended family to Michigan State. So a lot of hurting going on here in Michigan, and it's just the ultimate, gut check, perspective check for everybody.
Rival schools that were tweeting out words of support from Wisconsin to Purdue to Maryland and, of course, to the University of Michigan right before tip-off in this one. I saw that tweet. And Juwan Howard himself, head coach of the Wolverines, extending his thoughts and prayers to the Spartan family and nation. And as bitter and as hated as this rivalry can get, contested as it is, I mean, Tom Crawford makes an important point, the perspective that something like this provides. It shouldn't take something like this to provide that perspective, but it reinforces it. And certainly when you see the reaction of his teammates, there was a tweet from Miles Bridges reinforcing what we've known before about how close this group is as a family unit. United in faith. Tum Nairn now part of the extended coaching staff, and he was sitting right nearby Cassius and his brother Kai as they were comforting each other before the game. They had a prayer group, of course, throughout Tum's time there. And Josh Langford was a part of that. Miles Bridges, a part of that. Xavier Tillman, a part of that. And now they reach out during this time of tremendous loss, grief, and suffering for Cassius Winston. And whether you're a religious type or not, you have to see the power of this faith and what it means in the fabric of Michigan State basketball. And Tom, to have it kind of play out, that Cassius decided, you know what, it is better for me to play in this game, to have something to occupy my mind and my time, to have the love of my band of brothers, my teammates around me, my coaches above me, my fans in the building. I think it speaks a lot to the nature of what Tom Izzo has built there, and that it truly is a family. Those aren't just words. That's not just coach speak.
No, that's true. And some people can have a lot of depth in their faith and not necessarily reveal it. Religion is a very private thing of how people communicate it. Some people are more demonstrative about it, but I mean, Michigan State is that roster. A lot of them went to religious private schools. Is a faith-based program. There's no question about it. Very unified team, and we saw that tonight out at the Breslin Center. I thought Michigan State handled it wonderfully. They haven't handled things, all that great. We've talked about that in some regards, but I'm telling you what, like decorating the Albion colors, on crepe paper throughout the railings of the Breslin Center, things of that nature. Tom Izzo wearing a purple shirt. I mean, it just on and on and on. I thought it was very nicely done tonight. I thought the Big Ten did a great job. Jeremy Sampson at PA did a great job. I mean, it was all good. I mean, all good relative in a very tragic event. And so it'll be interesting because, as we well know, grief comes in waves. I'm sure you know that, Ryan. I've certainly known that over, in my situations, losing parents and loved ones, and you think you're fine, you're running on adrenaline, and hey, I'm getting through this, and all of a sudden, it's going to catch you 2 weeks down the road, 4 weeks down the road. So Cassius Winston is going to be tested, obviously, all year in his grief, but I'm sure he'll come through in flying colors.
He certainly did tonight, and did so as a leader on this team in spite of his own personal loss and suffering. And I think that was a rising tide that lifted all boats around him. I mean, these guys rallied to his side, whether it was during the national anthem, on the bench during a timeout. After the game, Tom Izzo had a private conversation with Cassius. On the court, it was magic. Some of the passes he was making, it was as if he just kind of evaporated into this basketball world and was able to contribute on the floor in the way that he usually does. And this all precludes Thursday night's Gabbett tip-off games that will be played at Newark, New Jersey on Fox Sports 1 against Seton Hall, a road game for Michigan State, a true road game. As far as on the court, I mentioned some of the earlier numbers, still struggling to shoot from three, Michigan State, to a large degree. They were just 7 of 25, but they dominated points in the paint, and they were able to get 31 buckets inside the three-point arc, a lot of those from their bigs. Notably, as I mentioned, Marcus Bingham Jr., Xavier Tillman was 5 of 8 from the floor. Bingham was 5 of 9. Kithier, a perfect 5 for 5. I want to touch on him just for a moment, Tom, because when I watch Kithier play and develop, and his basketball IQ on the floor, his spacing, his positioning, he knows where to be, and he knows when to be there, and he knows how to get there, and he knows how to find open lanes that maybe the average player wouldn't, and maybe the average fan wouldn't even notice. But if you're a basketball honk junkie like you and I are, you notice a player like Thomas Kithier and how easy he makes the game for himself by all those things I just talked about.
Yeah, all these teams that, all these really, championship teams that Michigan State has had, and all good championship teams of other schools, they always have these kind of quote-unquote role players, and sometimes when you look at Michigan State, you think they're just a bunch of there's a lot of role players on that team, like who's the go-to guy. But Kithier is going to be one of those garbage scrapping kind of guys, that is going to be consistent. I go back to the 2000 national championship team and A.J. Granger type guy who, not the most spectacular player on that team, but one that you could always depend on. I think Kithier is going to be in that category. He's got, he broke his nose. He took a shot in his nose tonight. He's dripping blood, and he's getting, he goes to the end of the bench for a few minutes, and then he's back in there. So he's an absolute grinder, and he's certainly going to play a huge role on this Michigan State team this year.
I was encouraged by his play and certainly encouraged by Bingham's play as well. Gabe Brown is not shy to take shots. He was 3 of 4 from the floor. Kyle Irons, I think they're working him back relatively slowly, but he's going to be an important part. This team is rounding out to be one that's going to be about 9-10 deep. And how about the alley-oop dunk from Foster Lawyer to Julius Marble? This guy put on a show with a tomahawk, Tom. It was worthy of SportsCenter's top 10.
Oh, yeah. and Marble's one of those guys. The freshmen played so much better. And obviously, the competition has a lot to do with that. And you're going to the MSG in your first game, and the freshmen kind of were deer in the headlights, as we talked about last podcast. But, they get some games under their belt, including Rocket Watts, who I think is going to be a really, really good player. You're not going to have to teach him defense, and that's huge. That will keep you on the court. So I think they're in pretty good shape. It'll be interesting to see them play Seton Hall. Back into a not Kentucky-esque, but pretty close. Closer than obviously Binghamton, and so it'll be interesting to see how Michigan State does and the younger players do in that Thursday game.
It will be, and it'll be, of course, important to note that Seton Hall star player Miles Powell, he'll be out for that game, and he's out indefinitely with what is called a serious, quote-unquote, ankle injury, and that is definitely something to keep an eye on for a Seton Hall team that had high hopes this year with Powell. Without him, going to be a tough road against Michigan State. As far as Rocket Watts, hit his first 3 and then missed his last 6. A little bit less settling on the perimeter for him. Like to see more dribble penetration, a little bit more creativity offensively on the handle. But this is a guy, like you said, very raw, Tom, but very talented, and a guy that he's going to be much better come February, March than he is here in November, December.
Well, the perimeter shooting this is not probably going to be a great perimeter shooting team. There's not Matt McQuaid or Kenny Goins walking in the door or some of the other great perimeter shooters they have. But one thing I noticed about tonight was Michigan State does 3 things really, really well. They defend, they rebound, and they run. And they were good at all that tonight. And that's really the core of this team more than the perimeter shooting is.
Michigan State out rebounding Binghamton 48-33. Two stats that stood out. You heard Tom Izzo mention one of them. This is in the unforced errors department. They only had 4 turnovers.
That's amazing. Yeah, amazing stat.
4 to 21 for Binghamton. And maybe even more impressive for me, Tom, Michigan State won 17 of 20 at the free throw line, 85% as a team.
No, yeah, that's another good thing. Like those are all attributes that can make up for like the perimeter shooting issue, but I think they'll be fine. I'm still, we were talking tonight on Press Pass about this November 5th start and what can you grasp out of that Kentucky game. It's so doggone early, and this team now compared to the team in mid-January, and then maybe the team in late February, it's all going to be at different tiers of progression, which will, Michigan State fans will hopefully be a positive progression. But it's just such a long season. It's really hard to evaluate how these 4 teams that played in Madison Square Garden will be. I mean, those are the blue blood teams, and yet they're all teams that get better, and that's the mark of a good program.
Let's put it this way. If you had told me a year ago by the calendar date, November 10th, 2018, Ryan, this Michigan State team is going to make the Final Four, I would have said, well, that's a nice thought, and here's hoping, but I want what you're drinking or smoking or whatever, pass it along. Of course, that's a team that built themselves leaps and bounds, improved over those months that Tom just mentioned. January, February, went 3-0 against a very good Michigan Wolverines team, and that rivalry will be renewed and hot once again this year. Wolverines will be playing on Tuesday night, and we'll have a full preview of that coming as they try to kind of fine-tune some things after the Appalachian State game. Tom, will you be at the game Tuesday night?
Oh, yeah, I go to all the games. I'll be also at the Elon game. Elon, I think Elon's how you pronounce it, E-L-O-N.
Yeah, you're right.
On Friday night as well. I go to all the games. I got a press pass, and I'll be there getting, sound bites and things. And Michigan, is a few tiers behind Michigan State in terms of the finished product, and there's going to be some transition woes, I think, for this team under the new Juwan Howard system. That's going to take a while, but I think they'll be in the tournament, and that's where the expectations lie, I think.
Creighton Blue Jays will be opponent on Tuesday night. That's a 6:30 Eastern time start. And as Tom mentioned, Elon comes to town on Friday night. Well, let's just put it this way. Michigan doesn't have the toughest out-of-conference schedule, but this is a team that I think benefits from just minutes on the floor together, regardless of the opponent. So once again, we'll have a full recap of Tuesday night's game in our midweek podcast with Juwan Howard and the Wolverines back in action. Spartans once again winners tonight on Sunday night over Binghamton, 100-47, the final score there. Just a final note on Cassius Winston. The couple of times that I've had direct interactions with him, I mean, time and again, it doesn't matter who you are. Cassius, one, isn't going to be one who is guarded with his time, his emotions, his access. He's very open, honest, direct. You ask him a question, he gives you a straightforward answer. And I remember when I was in the courtroom, actually Jason Nick was with me. This was down in Mason, Michigan. And we were watching some of the opening testimony in the Larry Nassar case with Rachel Den Hollander and Kyle Stevens, who would later come forward with her name as well. And Cassius Winston was in that courtroom. Cassius Winston was serving as an intern for one of the local law firms in East Lansing. This isn't talked about a lot, but he has high aspirations after basketball, and he's going to make an impact on many lives no matter what he does. And in my interviews with him, whether it would be in a post-game situation or on media day, again, Cassius could not be more warm, accommodating, level-headed, mature beyond his years. And I said this as we previewed Michigan State basketball coming in, but never did I think in a million years that we would have his character revealed in such a raw and open way as with him having to handle the loss of a brother and do it on a public stage. And Tom, I don't think that can be stressed enough. When you and I have experienced losses in our life, family members, we've been able to do so in relatively private fashion, and maybe that's a good thing. And as much as the Winston family's privacy can be respected at this time, it's still, he's a public figure. He's a star. He is beloved by thousands of Spartan fans across the country. And that's a heavy burden to bear without these circumstances. And I just think with them, for him to be able to perform the way he did tonight in light of that, he is just a special person. He is a 99th percentile person.
Yeah, he's he's not a normal person. I say that in a positive way. I think though, generally speaking, about youth, millennial, young people are way more resilient than I think most of us give them. And I'm not just saying everybody is freakishly strong mentally and physically and as talented and as smart as Cassius Winston. And the kid could have gone to an Ivy League school. He came out of a really good high school in UD Jesuit High School in the Detroit area, the Catholic League. So he's got all the intangibles for success. But it's amazing. I think though what basketball. That court at the Breslin Center, and Albion was just playing there a week and a half ago, whatever. It's kind of like that. You're in a vacuum there. That's his safe zone. That's his comfort zone. And it does not surprise me at all that he opted to play, because I just think that was therapeutically the best thing for him. You can just kind of let it. You can sit there and let it overwhelm you. And just people handle grief in so many different ways. Some people internalize it. Some people get it out quicker. Sometimes it comes in a delayed fashion. But the bottom line in the whole thing was it was just a horrible, horrible day for a lot of people around here.
For him to overcome that and for his teammates to support him, the fans certainly did as well. I know that Tom Izzo appreciated all of that. It sets the tone for the rest of the season. This is something that's going to be with Cassius for the rest of his life and certainly for the rest of this 2019-20 campaign. But no young man I've ever met is better equipped to handle adversity, this type of tremendous loss as Cassius Winston's.
Oh, no question about it. And it's a long, long season. And it's going to be a storyline. No question about it. It could be one of those melodramatic moments in April in Atlanta. Who knows? You just never know what fate has for people. I do know that Michigan State, in particular Cassius Winston, is going to get a lot of support that would not be getting that support because people embrace young people, positive people, and how do you not like Cassius Winston? So we'll see how he does, and I think his team. And the other thing, Ryan, his teammates have handled that incredibly well, from my understanding and hearing Tom Izzo in the post-game interviews tonight. And that that's a mark of a quality team and a quality coaching staff.
You're listening to the Great Lakes Divide podcast with Tom Crawford. I'm Ryan Schuling. It's brought to you each and every time out by the Record Lounge in Rio Town. Our good friend Heather Frowry going to have a multimedia cast as Tom Crawford interviews her on camera for a Facebook Live Tom's Take Throwback Thursday. We'll have the audio from that conversation coming up in our midweek podcast as the Record Lounge moves from the back of the store at the Rio Town Marketplace to the front of the store. We'll have all the pictures. Tom will have those for you, and a conversation with Heather Frowry coming up. Again, holiday shopping season is upon us, and what better gift for dad, for grandpa, for your brother, for your nephew who's getting into vinyl collection. I know a lot of the millennials and even Gen Z crowd is getting into the vintage throwback vinyl and the record players, and they have those equipment, the hi-fi stereos at the Record Lounge in perfect working order and condition, along with all the all-time great music and new music every Friday. That's the Record Lounge in Rio Town.
Well, we started with the good news, the silver lining that came out of a terrible night for Cassius Winston and a terrible 24 hours for him. It was also reported that Tom Izzo stayed with him virtually throughout the night as basically one-on-one counseling along with the rest of his family. And for Cassius to pull it together and play tonight, certainly Coach Izzo had a big part in that. And I guess it puts in perspective for Michigan State football fans that are absolutely dumbstruck by what happened at Spartan Stadium on Saturday afternoon. This was, in my opinion, and I've been watching Michigan State football since about 1983. I remember Dave Urema at quarterback for the Spartans. I know Tom Crawford does as well. Oh, yeah. But since that time and through the Peerless years and Nick Saban and Bobby Williams and John L. Smith, there have been bad losses, no doubt about it. There's gut-wrenching losses. and one in particular that our mutual friend, Tom's and mine, Dave Ackerley, formerly of WLNS TV6 in Lansing, brought to my attention on Twitter, was the Breslin Edwards game in which Michigan State blew a big lead, but that game was in Ann Arbor. It went to overtime. Oh, by the way, Michigan was a really good team back then with Chad Henne and Breslin Edwards and Mike Hart. So I don't see the shame in that loss. I see the pain in that loss perhaps being greater. But the shame of this loss, all due respect to the Fighting Illini, this game should have been over. It was at one point 28-3. It was 31-10. Michigan State surrendered 27 fourth quarter points. They blew a lead that looked to be secure. Again, it's one of the biggest collapses I've ever seen. And the numbers just don't add up in a 37-34 loss to Illinois. After Illinois punted when they were down 31-10, they countered with a 3-play, 91-yard touchdown drive that was a big touchdown pass from Brandon Peters. 5 plays, 53 yards after a Michigan State punt for another TD. That pulled them to within 14 and then 7 at 31-24. Illinois throws an interception. Looks like Michigan State might be able to escape the fact that they fumbled the ball in the previous play. But the pick six for Michigan State. Illinois returns it the entire way. Cuts the lead to 1, but lo and behold, they missed the extra point. I mean, Sidney Brown takes it to the house for the touchdown, and it looks like the Spartans might even skate by then, up 31-30. They even had a 5-play, 47-yard drive that took $1:36 off the clock and added to their lead with a Chris Coughlin field goal that made it 34-30. But Illinois would march down the field 75 yards on 13 plays, the Michigan State defense playing the part of Swiss cheese, and Illinois would cap it off with a touchdown that would clinch the game. Now, Michigan State outgained Illinois overall 526-405. On the ground, 275-36. First downs, Michigan State had 27 to just 16 for the Illini. Time of possession, Michigan State held the ball for more than 15 minutes longer than Illinois, 37-44 to 22 minutes and 16 seconds. And Illinois was even penalized 3 times as much. 9 penalties to 3, 94 yards to 30. Yet the Spartans pulled a feat from the jaws of victory. They fall 37-34 when Pat Caputo of the Oakland Press and Detroit Radio, the Ticket 97.1, asked Coach Dantonio afterward, and I'm paraphrasing, but what can you say to assure the fans and alumni that this is not part of a trend downward? And Mark Dantonio's reply to that was typical Mark Dantonio. Next question. But for a guy that since the college football playoff loss to Alabama is under 500 in the Big Ten, that includes the 2016, 17, 18, and 19 seasons. This is a 4-season sample size. They are break even basically across the board when it comes to out-of-conference play as well. And they're ticketed now, assuming that they lose to Michigan, which I'm going to go ahead and do, and we'll talk more about that midweek. If they win out after that against Maryland and Rutgers, to finish 6-6, go to something like the Quick Lane Bowl, and then you're kind of staring fate in the face and going, what are we doing here? And I think Mark Dantonio owed it to Spartan Nation to answer that question from Pat Caputo. He doesn't have any capital left to flippantly answer a question like that with, quote, next question, or to call Hondo's question a dumbass question a couple of weeks ago. It's late enough in the season, Coach Dantonio. This team is what it is. You lost Joe Bacci. You let him stay on the sidelines. He's an honorary coach despite a PED popping. And the message that sent the team is what? And the way that they performed in the second half is what? And who's accountable for it? Who's accountable for anything right now? That word escapes me, and I can't explain it, and I can't determine anybody that's standing up and being accountable. A lot of finger pointing, a lot of losing, a lot of bad football. But Tom Crawford, as you watch this breathtaking collapse of Michigan State football that really was a microcosm of not only this entire season, but the tenure that I just mentioned, since the Big Ten championship win over Iowa and the poleaxing at the hands of Alabama in the college football semifinal, this has been a bad to, at best, mediocre football program. Now we're going on 4 years. You can look at the 2016 class that has collapsed under the weight of itself with various things that have taken guys off the roster. but you can't blame that entirely. I think the coaching staff bears the brunt of this. They don't look prepared sometimes, and then like a game on Saturday where they look prepared and they were executing, they don't play a full game cover to cover 60 minutes, and they just let the bottom fall out. And this is not the first time. In the fourth quarter, I think Chris Solari tweeted this out in that time span I was mentioning. They've been outscored by almost 100 points total in the fourth quarter over these 4 years. Your initial reaction to Michigan State's loss to Illinois and where it goes from here?
Well, let me touch on. I agree. Obviously, with your comment about Mark Dantonio, because that question, and I heard the replay of that question. It was framed very diplomatically, and it wasn't. He should not have been defensive. So he's looking really, really bad. He really is. Now, I know his former players love him and all that, and I'm sure he's. It's like we're all made up of good and bad, but he's looking really, really bad as far as a coach and handling this. He's not handling it well. His team looks like a train wreck in terms of holding their composure. I mean, I say that, but my God, 275 and 251 respectively in terms of rushing and throwing. I'm watching that game, Ryan, and I'm a little bit concerned while I'm watching it, especially at 28-3 and 31-10. Hey, Michigan State is going to be a tough out next week. I still think they will be to some degree. But to have everything unravel like that, maybe it's mental fatigue, maybe it's physical fatigue. Maybe this team isn't conditioned well. Who knows why they fade in the fourth quarter? That is an interesting stat. But this team, in my mind, it is indeed broken. Their fan base is broken. I'm getting countless texts saying, well, you got us next, just people already sandbagging it. The game is over with next week. And there's not a lot of fire in this program. Yet I say that, Ryan, and Mark Dantonio is not going anywhere. He's not going to get, Bill Beekman's not going to fire him, and he's not going to quit. So Michigan State fans better embrace it and make that decision that they want to renew their season tickets next year or not.
Well, hold the phone on that one, Tom. I'll agree with you. Bill Beekman's not going to fire him. In fact, just the day before, he really mind-numbingly said that it's not even a consideration, which, again, you could view that as the famous kiss of death from your higher-ups whenever you get that kind of endorsement, but not in this case. I mean, Beekman, I'll just put it bluntly, he worships at the altar of Mark Dantonio and of Tom Izzo, and some of that's for good reason. But you have to have some certain perspective, to borrow the word from earlier, and that includes a guy that I respect and like very much, and Darian Harris, one of his former players that I know has become a colleague of ours in the media. You can't lose sight of the forest for the trees, though, and you can appreciate everything Mark Dantonio's done, and Darian can appreciate everything that he's done for him personally, teammates of his, off the field stuff we don't see. I acknowledge all of that. I embrace all of that. I am happy for all of that. But the bottom line is this is a bottom line business, and this program is stuck in the mud, and this loss was just the cherry on top of the shit sundae that has become Michigan State football. And it's embarrassing because Mark Dantonio built these expectations. Nobody else did that for him. He did it. He put Michigan State at the precipice of the elite in college football, making the college football playoff. That is no small accomplishment. He got there. He deserves credit for that. But equally, he deserves blame for a program that has gone due south from that very top of the mountain. Pride comes before the fall. Refused to make changes on his coaching staff. They look bumbling, stumbling, completely ill-equipped to manage a team front to cover, start to finish for all 60 minutes, to have a player base properly focused for an entire game, to execute, to deliver, to win. This is not a winning football team. They don't have that winning mentality. They don't have that winning swagger. They certainly don't have the winning performance or execution on the field. So while I'll agree, he won't be fired. He won't even be forced out. But I think his pride is going to get to him at some point where he's going to have to look in the mirror and say, what am I doing here? And if, let's just say, and I know, Tom, you're really reluctant to go there, but I'm going to go there because you know me, I can detach myself from this as I'm looking at this as objectively as possible. Michigan should curb stomp Michigan State next week. This should be a game decided by about 20 points. The early line was 12. That's already up to 14.5 favor the Wolverines in Ann Arbor. And let's just say Michigan blows Michigan State out. At that point, how does Mark Dantonio have any capital, any leg to stand on to address Spartan Nation, the season ticket holders, many of whom I know are not going to renew. They're not, especially if there are no changes made to that offensive staff. If he triples down on that offensive staff, I mean, is that not the point of no return in terms of insanity?
Well, I mean, he might not triple down exclusively. I mean, he might make some changes. But let me tell you something. If he loses next week, which I think we all agree he will lose, I think it's going to be maybe a closer game than a lot of people think. You think Mark Dantonio, with his psychotic level of hatred towards Michigan, is going to want to leave this program through losing 3 out of 4 to Jim Harbaugh? That ain't going to happen. He's not going to leave on that, and Beekman's not going to whack him. And this new president, I don't know anything about him, but I don't think he's going to whack him either. You're stuck with this situation, Brian. I truly think this for another year before. I mean, I would be shocked if he's not coaching next year. I mean, I've gone back and forth on that, but now that I'm thinking that Beekman is going to, I've delved into it more. I mean, Dantonio is not going to quit if Michigan beats him. I swear to God, he's not going to accept that.
Well, President Sam Stanley, I agree. He's kind of new to the territory here. He's finding his way through. A lot of his focus has been on academics and repairing the image of Michigan State that has been badly damaged by themselves, by their own vagabond board of trustees who are determined to stonewall against any outside investigations regarding Larry Nassar or anything else. We're going to have the deposition for 7 hours in January for Mark Dantonio. There's a decision that must be made at that point. If he is still head coach by the middle of January, he will get a bonus of $4.3 million. And is Michigan State going to be willing to cut bait on that much money just to look for another coach that they'll have to pay even more? Probably not. So, Tom, I'm looking at it objectively and as reasonably and rationally as I can. And I would agree there's a better chance that Mark Dantonio comes back next year than he leaves because, again, he'd have to leave of his own accord. Now, you said several podcasts now going that he's done at Michigan State. Now, all of a sudden, you're saying he's not.
I'm flipping.
And I kind of see that.
I'll tell you why. Because of that Harbaugh thing. I mean, I had not let that sink into my head. That's going to be the if Michigan rolls these cats next week, you think he's going to want to end on that note with his ego relative to Michigan? I don't think that's going to happen. That's the part that I'm stuck on.
But, Tom, you were around. You remember Duffy Daugherty. And Duffy won 2 national championships. We've talked about this. And it got to a point where it's like, Duffy, look, you got to go. And he left.
But that was 5 straight. That was 67, 60. That was 6. 67, 68, 70, 71, 72, whatever that number is. That's longer than Dantonio's struggles. And he was still coached, and he finally he was kind of forced out the back end of that 72 season.
That may well be, but I mean, I could think of other examples where somebody stays too long, and that would certainly be one of them that's most directly applicable in Duffy Daugherty, but I can think of another that's not as directly applicable, but the same thing. Matt Millen was never going to quit as general manager, president of the Detroit Lions. He was never going to go down with the ship. He wanted to make sure that he didn't leave the Lions worse than he found them. He was determined to turn it around. He wasn't going to do it. It wasn't going to happen. And somebody had to show him the door. And finally, Bill Ford Jr. stepped in on an elevator and made the announcement, if it were up to me, he'd be gone. And then Matt Millen was gone. But if it was up to Clay Ford Sr., that might have never happened. You know, Martha Ford's a different deal altogether. But what I'm saying is, there comes a point in everybody's life, in any profession that you do, that you got to give up the ghost. You know, the party's over. The music stops. The lights come up. And you got to go. And I just don't know. I mean, is Mark Dantonio oblivious to the fact that his program is not very good right now? Can he really wrap his arms around that?
But he's stubborn. And he's not going to do anything that he's not going to be forced to do. And Michigan State as an entity doesn't really have any leadership out there. I mean, Tom Izzo is in a vacuum with his basketball program. He leads the basketball program, and he's a great ambassador for the university. But he's not his job duties aren't to lead the entire university. They don't have a leader in that university. They just don't. The board is a train wreck. They have board members that are resigning because they won't self-investigate. I mean, it's a mess out there. And when you have a mess, you don't have decisions made. It's just a status quo scenario.
You know what really got me, Tom, is I was watching that Minnesota-Penn State game. That Minnesota offense that PJ Fleck runs is nearly identical to Michigan State's offense. In the pro set with the quick reads and the execution that the Gophers had was what Michigan State at one time had. What Michigan State might have had most of the way through the 2017 season, which is looking more and more like a blip on the radar, an aberration compared to 2016, 2018, and now 2019. But you watch the Gophers beat Penn State, improve to 9-0, a steep improvement curve under PJ Fleck, the execution. But the biggest thing that stood out to me, Tom, the hogs on the offensive line. They showed that graphic on Fox watching that game that Minnesota averages 6'6" and 350 pounds in the offensive line.
Well, they got that 400-pounder. They got a monster man there.
Yeah, he's 6'9" and about 425.
Yeah, that right tackle.
That
skews a little bit. Minnesota's got big-time receivers, better than Michigan's, obviously, better than Ohio State's. PJ's got talent, and that takes me to my other thing about Michigan State. You know, you can concern yourself about the coaching staff. That coach, as far as, scheme and all that stuff and who does what, there's not enough talent on that team. Look at recruiting. They're like 47th or 50th right now. They got to get better players, and they got more. They have to get more of them. That's their problem.
And Tom, where's that going to come from? Because I know your friend and mine, your favorite, Rico Beard, said in another podcast, I was told, that families, and Rico gets pretty close to a lot of these families and these players, particularly in the Detroit area. He knows them personally, that they're not impressed with Jim Bowman. They don't really appreciate Bowman as a football mind or communicator or coach or anything like that. And he's in charge of that offensive line, and he's in charge, you'd have to say, at the head of the class for recruiting offensive line talent. And they're so bereft of talent up there that the guys that they keep wheeling in there are completely inadequate for Big Ten play. And we see that not only in terms of size, but in speed and skill. So, at what point do you just call it what it is? And this isn't going to get any better anytime soon. And it doesn't come from a Michigan fan's perspective that when you hear, hey, Mark Dantonio is going to be back, aren't the people in Ann Arbor rejoicing that fact at this point?
Well, I am for the sole fact that Michigan people don't like Mark Dantonio for a lot of reasons, and I will just speak on my own accord. Because he's beaten Michigan. Michigan has lost Michigan State have only beaten them 3 times in the last out of 10 years, or like 3-7 or whatever. That's just unacceptable. And Mark Dantonio has been a good coach, so you always hate a good coach. But his attitude towards Michigan, starting back in 2007, can we have a moment of silence and all that BS that he threw at Michigan? He's very negative. He can be an old asswipe a lot of times. I'm just calling it the way it is. I don't like the guy, and the way that he's treated a lot of fellow alumni or Michigan State alumni. The stories I hear are appalling of how he's treated people. He's no Tom Izzo, not even close. Not even close. And so for that reason, I want him to stay there because, listen, your program, when it's down, that's good for my program. When your program's doing good, that's not good for my program. It's one or the other. And you look historically 5-6 decades when one's up, just like a Seinfeld. One friend's up, the other one's down. Same thing in Michigan State.
Tom, I got to go back and have you expand on that comment you just said about how Mark Dantonio treats alumni. Are you talking about former players or donors?
No, I'm talking. No. I've more than a handful of people who have gone up as an alumnus and approached Mark Dantonio. He's not exactly approachable to a lot of people. He doesn't like that stuff. And in a couple, 3 or 4 incidences of different people that don't even know each other, he's been rude to them. Okay, you don't do that. You don't do that in that position. That's idiotic. But maybe he doesn't think he needs to do that. And I couldn't care less because it's not my school.
Well, we'll see where it goes from here for Michigan State, but we know where it's heading, and that's Ann Arbor, and that's Saturday, and that's noon, and it's on Fox. And the Wolverines will be looking for blood. They're not going to have any sympathy or love.
But don't you think Michigan State?
Program.
Let me stop you there for a second. How about this old Devin Bush thing and how mad Michigan State people are for that incident? And we know how much hatred that a lot of those Ohio-bred players that are on his team have for Michigan. And then Mark Dantonio himself and all those people, that whole program hates Michigan. Don't you think that'll have any bearing on it or not?
Tom, I'll be perfectly blunt, and I don't know if I speak for all Michigan State fans, but for me, the Devin Bush thing, tearing at the turf, that feels like 100 years ago. That feels like 100 years ago right now. It seems like a distant, foggy memory with a 4-5 season right in front of the Spartans that's going nowhere, that might not even go to a bowl. I think you got to, worry about the fish you can fry. And for Michigan State, it's the task right in front of them. And it's not even winning the first quarter. It's winning the first possession, trying to if Michigan starts the ball, forcing the punt. If Michigan State starts with the ball, getting points on the board. I mean, it's that simple at this point. But no, I don't think Michigan State's in any position right now to be all holier than thou about you came in and tore up our field. Who cares? You've lost 5 games before Michigan this year.
Well, here's another thing that I think there's some, and they might not admit it, but I think it's kind of like that Lions fan mentality that I think there's some Michigan State fans who are fantasizing the fact, if Michigan rolls us, hey, man, that'll get Dantonio out of there. We can get a fresh start. And they start looking at things like Matt Campbell at Iowa State and guys like that. They're already going to their short list, their long list, and all that stuff. I really think there's some people who are going to embrace the idea, just like the Bobby Williams game, the 49-3 in 2002.
Well, people are already saying that the next question, quote, might be his "I don't know" Bobby Williams moment, or John L. Smith hitting himself in the head, or the coaches can't get right. Just looking back now on the weekend that was, and of course we'll have a full preview Michigan State coming up in our midweek podcast. Is what the Great Lakes Divide is all about. And I want to invite people also on Thursday night. It'll be after the Michigan State Seton Hall game. I believe it's on FS1. There'll be an hour-long special about the divide in the rivalry between Michigan and Michigan State. It looks fascinating. Look for that in your local listings, of course. But, of course, over the weekend, Ohio State rolls Maryland 73-14. This is the best football team in the country, and I'll back that up in a moment. Penn State falls at Minnesota 31-26, and the Gophers finally get a signature win in their caps. Wisconsin holds on at home over Iowa 24-22. The Badgers now the only team mathematically standing between Minnesota and Indianapolis, both geographically and in terms of head-to-head, because the Badgers have 2 losses in conference. The Gophers have none. They've only got a few more games to play. And the Illini, the Hawkeyes, each have 3 losses. That ain't happening. Minnesota still has to play both Iowa and Wisconsin, so we'll see where this goes for the Gophers. Purdue wins at Northwestern 24-22, and, of course, Illinois comes back to beat Michigan State 37-34. Tom, if you were to forecast the college football playoff top 4 for Tuesday night, rank them 1 through 4, how do you think it will turn out? Not how you think it should be, but how you think they'll go.
I think, LSU will be number 1, obviously, because they have the best resume right now based on those two huge road, Texas and then Alabama, very impressive. Ohio State would be number 2. Clemson, they haven't beaten anybody, but they're impressive beating nobody, so they're 3. And then I'm thinking that Alabama will still be in there, number 4, but Oregon will be knocking on the door because they only had 1. Well, they'll be 5th because they only have 1 loss, and that was the first weekend to an Auburn team, so you can call that a quality loss. Although people will argue if they've beaten anybody because the Pac-12, isn't the highest caliber. But I think this might be the year the Pac-12 gets in. I don't think Alabama's going to get at the final CFP. I think this is the year that it's going to be a single team, 1 team per conference deal.
What about Georgia, Tom?
Yeah, they're playing well, but they have a bad loss. They lost to South Carolina, who lost to Appalachian State, for God's sakes.
But Georgia has a path, and they're going to the SEC championship game in Atlanta, where they're likely going to play now LSU.
I know, and they'll lose.
LSU,
but they'll lose, and so I already know that they're going to lose. And the other thing is, if Minnesota was in the SEC, they'd have 4 losses. I'm sorry. They're going to lose at Iowa on Saturday.
Where do you rank Minnesota right now in the college football playoff standings?
Oh, I would probably put them behind. I'd put them behind Utah, definitely behind. I'd put them behind Oklahoma. I'd put them
around 9 or 10.
Yeah.
If Minnesota wins out, and that would include wins against Iowa, Wisconsin, and the Big Ten championship game against Ohio State, and they're undefeated, are they in the college football playoff?
I think they are. Yeah, absolutely, They do. But Ohio State's going to have one loss because they're going to lose to Michigan on. You're
Fair
laughing.
Enough, Fair enough. We'll see. We'll get to that.
But Ohio State will be in the CFP because they're going to roll. They'll be in the CFP and they're going to roll Minnesota. I mean, roll them. Probably.
My top four, I can't dock Ohio State from the top spot when they beat Maryland by almost 60 points. So I'm going to leave them at 1. LSU's a strong 2. Then I think there's a significant drop-off. And Clemson would be 3 for me. And I agree with you, Alabama is still 4. Now, they'll probably fall out of that spot for the reasons that you stated. These other teams, Oregon might play Utah, both teams with 1 loss in a Pac-12 championship game where the winner goes to the playoff, and that might be fair. The SEC, the champion, whether it's LSU or Georgia, one of those teams is probably going to get in. Ohio State, maybe 2. Ohio State's in if they win out. Clemson is going to win out. They have the easiest path by far of anybody left in college football, and there you go. That's the math right there for those 4 teams, and we'll see what happens going forward from there. But I agree with you. LSU has the best resume. They beat Texas when they were ranked top 10. They're no longer there. They beat Auburn. That was a very good win for LSU. That's a team that beat Oregon. They've beaten Alabama. They've beaten Florida. So there's no team in America right now, Tom, that has a stronger quality of victory schedule than LSU.
No, LSU, they're everybody's fantasy team because when they play in a quality team on the road and when they're under duress, they keep coming at you. You know, Alabama scores a touchdown, Devontae Smith, you get it tight. They don't ball up. They just keep attacking. And Joe Burrow is at the core of that. I'm amazed at that team. That team is by far, well, they and OSU or Ohio State and LSU, I don't know how it pairs out, but I'd love to see them in the title game together. That would be one hell of a match.
Well, I think we're going to, and I think those are clearly the 2 best teams in America right now. And can you imagine, Tom, the storyline? Joe Burrow, Mr. Football in the state of Ohio,
oh my God,
played for his childhood dream school, Ohio State, gets hurt, transfers out, and then might go head-to-head with them for a national title.
Oh, it's too good. You know, it's so good. We got to make it happen. I mean, and I hate Ohio State, but I'm just saying it's going to happen, and I think LSU is going to come out on top. LSU. To me, I mean, I've watched them a ton of times this year, including against Mississippi State. They're just really, really, really sound in all facets. Ohio State's the second best team in the country right now.
We'll have those rankings to reflect upon in our midweek podcast. We'll take a look at those as well as a preview of Michigan State, the rivalry renewed. Also, we'll look back at Michigan basketball against Creighton from Tuesday night and the preview of Michigan State going up against Seton Hall on Thursday night. Lots to talk about in our midweek podcast. A conversation with Heather Ferrari in the Record Lounge awaits us as well. And that'll do it for us from here for now. For Tom Crawford, I'm Ryan Schuling. Thank you for listening to, subscribing, downloading the Great Lakes Divide podcast, brought to you once again by the Record Lounge in Rio Town. Have a great week, everybody.
The legend lives on from the Chippewa on down of the big lake they call Gitchagumi. The lake, it is said, never gives up her dead when the skies of November turn gloomy. With a load of iron ore, 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty. That good ship and true was a bone to be chewed when the gales of November came early. The ship was the pride of the American side, coming back from some mill in Wisconsin. As the big freighters go, it was bigger than most, with a crew and good captain well seasoned, concluding some terms with a couple of steel firms when they left fully loaded for Cleveland. Then later that night when the ship's bell rang, could it be the north wind they'd been feeling? tail sound, and the wave broke over the railing. And every man knew, as the captain did too, 'twas the witch of November come stealing. The dawn came late and the breakfast had to wait, when the gales of November came slashing. When afternoon came, it was freezing rain, in the face of a hurricane west wind.